Just for the record, state your name, please.
Jon Miles.
Okay, and you have a story about how the FBI conducted surveillance on the organization you worked for?
Right.
So can you tell me about that from the beginning?
The organization was the Tucson Committee for Human Rights in Latin America. And basically it was started by a bunch of Chileans, refugees that came to the United States after Pinochet took power in Chile. So the committee was put together to follow human rights abuses, mainly in Chile. But then as time, a couple of years went on, there was a lot going on in Central America, in El Salvador, Nicaragua. And in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas overthrew the Sandino government, and the National Guard basically kicked them out. So what happened after that was that the United States was funding the so-called freedom fighters. And it was with U.S. funds, taxpayer funds, and there was an amendment by a congressman named Bolin. It was called the Bolin Amendment, and it forbid the United States to support a counter-revolutionary or Contra group that was trying to overthrow another government. So then what happened that the Contras, who were the opposition, former, Somoza National Guardsmen who had it made, who caused all the trouble in Nicaragua, they wanted to get back in power. So the CIA had to come up with a plan of how we're going to fund them. So, so that's when our committee pretty much got involved with exposing what was going on and what the FBI was doing, and it ruffled a lot of feathers to the point where the FBI, started an investigation. And also, not only Nicaragua, but it was El Salvador. Like, our committee was a member of a group called Spies, which is a committee in solidarity with the people of El Salvador who were fighting oppression by the Salvadoran oligarch who was supported by the United States government. So between, being a member of Spies and bringing attention to people in the Tucson area about what really is going on in El Salvador and with the Contras in Nicaragua, it's at that time they figure, well, how are we going to stop these groups from getting the truth out? So the FBI got involved. So they investigated us. They were trying to find out, or trying to say that we were violating the law in what we were doing. And our position was, no, we're basically concerned citizens that are not violating any laws. We have the First Amendment to the Constitution, and we're just, we don't agree with U.S. policy. So because Ronald Reagan was president at that time too, and he was really a right-wing, president, and he supported the Contras. To the fact that he called them freedom fighters, which was absurd. So what we had found out through our contacts here, that the CIA was operating with a front organization called Evergreen Aviation. Evergreen Aviation was taking, weapons and et cetera down to Nicaragua, and in exchange getting drugs and bringing them back to the United States. We had exposed Evergreen Aviation, and a lot of the mainstream press kind of laughed at it until an Evergreen Aviation plane was shot down over Nicaragua by the Sandinistas. So, and they captured a guy named Eugene Hasenfoss, an American that was working for Air America. And they found all the armaments and stuff that were being sent down to Nicaragua. So
In 1986, Wisconsin native Eugene Hasenfuss made headlines. The plane he was in was shot out of the sky over Nicaragua by the Sandinistas. His capture and imprisonment blew the lid off the Iran-Contra affair. The scandal threatened the presidency of Ronald Reagan and made Hasenfuss a national figure.
So basically, the thing was that drugs were coming back to the United States and they could be sold on the whatever market it is, a black market or whatever, and the money that was raised could buy weapons and whatever the Contras needed, because legally they weren't allowed to send supplies, to the Contras who were trying to overthrow the Sandinistas. So,
October 5th, 1986. A plane crashes in the Nicaraguan jungle. Killed with a pilot, William Cooper, co-pilot, Wallace Sawyer, and a Contra radio man. Eugene Hasenfuss survived.
I went back, found my parachute, I cut it all up. I made a hammock out of it and a tent over the top because it was just raining out all the time. And then the rest of it I just used to keep the dampness and the mosquitoes and the other bugs off of me. But basically, I knew where I was, but I just happened to run headlong right into the Sandinistas that were there.
My name is Gene Hasenfuss.
And where you're from?
From Marinette, Wisconsin.
Can you tell us how you came to be here?
Shot out of the sky.
He crashed on Sunday at approximately noon. So basically I found out the same way everybody else did, from the press.
A Wisconsin man has been the focus of international news this week. 45-year-old Eugene Hasenfuss of Marinette was captured in Nicaragua after his cargo plane was shot down. At a press conference Thursday, Hasenfuss said his mission was directed by the CIA, but U.S. officials say the flights were privately directed. Mrs. Sally Hasenfuss joined her husband in Nicaragua this week. Hasenfuss has been jailed and may stand trial.
So, we had exposed all of this stuff, so it really, we didn't realize at the time how effective we were. But this was back in the early 80s. Well, it was like 83, 84. We had demonstrations out at Penalia Park where Evergreen Aviation was. And, we just kept the pressure up. And it wasn't until we didn't know at the time we were under investigation by the FBI until a year or so later when they started making phone calls. And there were 3 of us in the leadership of the organization, and they tried to contact, 2 of them worked for the university, and then there was me who worked for myself. So they tried initially the same pattern. They called Barbara Kingsolver's employer and said, "Does Barbara Kingsolver work for you?" They identified themselves as the FBI. And right away, that's intimidating to especially an employee when your boss knows the FBI is asking questions about it. The same thing happened with Joe Hoffman, working for the University of Arizona. The exact same thing. Well, they got frustrated with me because they couldn't find out who I worked for. So the FBI went around asking people in the progressive community, who's Jon Miles work for? So finally they got the word that I worked for myself. Well, lo and behold, I got a phone call from them, and I refused to talk with them. But they were saying they just wanted information about our group, how we got funding and blah, blah, blah. So I refused to talk to them. I told them it was none of their business and basically hung up. That was basically the approach that we took. So our committee finally decided that what we would do, being that we had nothing to hide, we would send a statement of our purpose and a couple of copies of our newsletters to the FBI and tell them that's all we would give them, that we weren't a 501c3. We did not have to disclose our funding sources, our mailing list, etc. So things kind of quieted down after that. Barb said that she and Joe were living together, that their phone had been tapped. I don't know whether mine was or not. I know I was pretty outspoken in the community, and I had gotten death threats over the telephone, et cetera, et cetera. So the year goes, it goes to 1989 when I get a phone call from ABC Evening News, Peter Jennings, ABC Evening News, and mentioned they had a news team in town that was covering the U of A Wildcat basketball team that was #1 in the nation, and they wanted to come and talk to me because of some information that the Center for Constitutional Rights had just gotten through the Freedom of Information Act about the FBI's illegal surveillance of groups that were opposed to U.S. policy in Central America. Well, they mentioned that there were 2 documents that had my name on it. One was, in fact, that the FBI had investigated the committee, and the local FBI agent sent a report to Phoenix to his main office saying that we weren't violating any laws, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then the FBI fired back to him that that's not good enough. We want a spin-off investigation. So we found out after that a spin-off investigation would be somebody could join the organization and try to find out what was going on. And at our meetings, we kept real good records of who attended the meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And we had 3 new people who joined the committee at that time, say 1983. And a couple of them were beyond reproach, but the third was kind of questionable and still is to this day. We never accused him, but we were very careful with what we said and did around him, and he was pretty obvious he wanted our mailing list. He wanted to get on the newsletter committee and financial committees, which is what the FBI was after. So we basically never got him any information. So those were basically in the 2 documents that they had. So the ABC Evening News came to interview me at the house, and I basically told them the story. They asked me if there was any footage of the demonstration that any news team covered up at Pinal Air Park, where Evergreen Aviation was based out of. I told them yes, there was, and their local ABC affiliate happened to have old news clippings of when we went out there. So they said it was Peter Jennings was doing a series on this on his evening news every night, and they said it would be on in the next couple of weeks. Well, we watched at home for quite a while, and it was right at dinner time. Nothing happened. We just kind of gave up, and then one night at dinner, phone rings, and I answered. It's one of my Army buddies. I was living up in San Francisco, and he said, "Hey, Miles, you're still a troublemaker." And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, I was just watching the news, and they interviewed you, on the news about the FBI and the CIA, and you said some pretty strong words." And I thought, "Oh, great." Then I started getting friends in Tucson that had seen it, that had seen the footage and recognized other people in the footage. So it got some coverage. But by that time, the FBI wasn't bothering me anymore, or us for that matter. And then, the phone calls that one of the guys that was threatening me wound up getting in trouble in another way and got probation. So he backed off, and he was part of a group called the CMA, or what is it, the Soldier of Fortune people, but they were raising funds and supplies for the Contras. So, but they kind of backed off, but they had an active chapter here in Tucson. So they really backed off after all this happened. So that's pretty much the story in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. And then there were, I remember a couple men in suits at some sort of function. And I was talking to them, and you called me over to you, and you told me not to talk to them. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, there were 2 guys with Arthur Gill and Sam Sharp They were right-wing zealots who supported the CMA, which is Civilian Military Assistance. And they would come to various events and tape record, and they were giving information to the FBI, which later on, when Arthur Gill was subpoenaed, or it was called to give a deposition in a court hearing, pre-court hearing, about accusing some state, or accusing some people of being communist, and he was sued for defamation of character. Well, a lot of this information came out in this deposition, and Bill Reisner took the deposition and gave me a copy of the deposition, and Sam Sharp and Arthur Gill, who did the deposition, were basically getting this information and giving it to the FBI, but I have no idea what the FBI did with that information.
And about what year was this?
Oh, this would have been in the 80s, the early 80s. And one thing in reading that deposition, a lot of this information that Arthur Gill had gathered up, probably 90% of it was wrong. He was accusing people of being communists or friends of communists who were not, When there were communists involved in some of these meetings, he didn't get their names. I mean, it's pretty sad, what they did. After a while, they could come to a public meeting place, like at Northwest Neighborhood Center or El Rio, and they could tape it. We'd make life pretty miserable for them, and then we started having meetings at private places or churches where we could kick them out, So that's how we affected them. But when we participated in the peace fair, they would come by and take pictures of all the peace groups and saying all the peace groups were a bunch of commies and communist supporters, They were just really, out in right field someplace. They were kind of, what do we call them? Right-wing fanatics, thinking like there's a communist behind every bush. When in fact there wasn't,
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay, you bet.
Do you have any last words?
No, I did go on like some radio programs, and I did make some heavy accusations about the FBI and the CIA. And I remember one that I said, and I don't know if they put it on the TV or not, because I didn't see the TV thing. They said, "What's the solution?" And I said, well, initially they should stop the surveillance of people that are concerned citizens who just don't agree with the president and the president's policy. And I said, furthermore, I said, they're like a cancer. And when you have a cancer, you have to remove the tumor. You have to get rid of those organizations and reorganize them, So
I bet they didn't like that.
yeah, probably. So I don't know what got on ABC Evening News. I know this radio station, it was a local KXCI radio station. So it was, I think, live on the air. So it got on there. So that was kind of a hardcore position, to just consider them a cancer and you had to eliminate the tumor,
Right.
And as far as, that award, that was kind of like, I don't know, it was kind of a joke. Like when Dan Ekstrom does all these events through LULAC, which is, a Latin American support organization. He does these dinners and stuff and people buy tickets. And I thought I was going to get an award myself. And I thought it was kind of ironic that the FBI was investigating me, and then they were going to give me an award for what, So I thought I had a speech lined up to talk about that line, but it turned out there was like 100 people were getting this little award. It was kind of just a joke, and it had woman who was in charge of the FBI here and the main FBI director, the woman from Phoenix, they presented this award. So when I went up to get the award, of course I wasn't allowed to say anything, but look, I said, I would like a picture of each one of you around me. So they took the picture. I said, I'd like a copy, which I never got, but they gave me this certificate and this little lapel pin, you know, from just saying the Department of Justice, DOJ. So it was kind of a joke. And I still think I have that certificate they gave me, you know.
Thank you.